So I'm so happy to be here. And forgive me because I can only see three people and then my slides. And usually when I give presentations, I like to look at my audience to see how everyone is responding, but we'll just move forward. So this is a presentation that is for anybody that is ever around children. So whether you have your own children, whether you are a school counselor, a coach, a teacher, this will apply to all of you. And like Joy said, I've been treating eating disorders for over 20 years now. And during the pandemic, I saw the highest uptick in eating disorders that I've ever seen. And it was a little different because I ended up getting almost the same call from parents, probably about 5 times a week. And the call went something like this. My child decided that they wanted to eat healthy. And they started maybe watching some online workout videos because, as we all know, there was really no structure during that time. And we were really proud of them. They were cutting out sugar, they were foregoing dessert, and they always really used to like carbs. And, we were congratulating that. And then fast forward maybe 2 to 3 months in, now their child has a very, very devastating eating disorder. And it was just amazing that I kept getting the same call. So I thought, I'm going to try to set up a presentation to give. I started with my friends giving it because I have a group of friends where we all have 13, 14-year-old children, and those are the types of people that we're calling. And what the parents were saying when they finally did get to my office is that, how come we don't get this information until we end up here and our kid already has a life-threatening eating disorder? And I thought, you are right. I am going to put it all out so that even if you think that somebody around you, a loved one, would never end up with an actual eating disorder, this information will help pave the way for somebody to have a really healthy relationship to food in their body. And if we think about it, our relationship to food and body, those are the two longest relationships we will ever have in our whole life. We will always need to eat food. We always will live in our body. And so again, even if, you think, okay, eating disorders are far-fetched, this will still apply. And again, if you're around kids, I really hope that you take this information to heart and that you also give yourself a lot of grace as we go over kind of the do's and don'ts, because we all live in the same culture. So here we go. Oh, and now I cannot get my slide to move. Let's see. Is that something that you wouldn't do that, Joy, right? How come it's not moving? Oh no.
No, it should allow you to advance.
While I figure this out.
Okay.
How weird. I'm just pressing the arrow over, yes? Let's see if I can do a new share. Huh. That's so interesting. I can't move my screen forward.
If you click on the PowerPoint on your desktop, does it allow you to?
Yeah, no, but let me see. Okay, wait, stop share, pause share. Let me try to pull it up again.
Okay.
Oh,
pause.
Nope.
I bet if you redo it, it will work. Otherwise, you can send it to me and I'm happy to present.
Okay, let's see. Sorry about this. There we go. Can you see that?
Not yet, but maybe in a moment.
Oh. Nope. Oh no. It used to be a little easier to spot, and now it's become a little bit more difficult because instead of only diet culture about thinness, we have what's called toxic wellness culture. So I want you to think about health as something that is very nurturing and calming. And if there is something in your life that someone tells you to do to be healthy that stresses you out or adds a lot of angst and fear into your life, that may not actually be healthy. So wellness culture kind of came in like a Trojan horse, with this disguise, like, oh, well, we want you to eat quote unquote clean. We want you to eat unprocessed foods. And the problem with it, though, is that it actually moralizes the type of food, and especially for growing kids and teens, when they go through these brain developments that we'll talk about as we go on, where at first they're very black and white in their ability to navigate the world. And then they go through a brain development, usually around high school age, where they can probably think a little bit more abstract. But the problem with wellness culture is that sometimes people end up eating quote unquote so healthy that they become unhealthy because they take out so many different types of foods, which actually is another eating disorder called orthorexia that we'll talk about. So, diet culture demonizes certain types of bodies, whereas wellness culture demonizes or elevates certain types of foods. So, if you eat kale, you're going to grow angel wings and fly to heaven. And if you eat an Oreo, you are going to, go down under. And wellness culture really perpetuates this idea that our bodies don't know what to do on their own, that we can't trust them, that there's something wrong, and that maybe if we just find the next, health practitioner or naturopath or, detox plan or celery juice, that everything will be cured. And that was actually interesting because also during COVID, if you all recall the celery juicing, and people said this will, cure everything, and from acne to cancer. So again, really noticing, is this wellness information causing me to be fearful? Is it fear mongering, or is it actually causing me to be well? Examples of wellness culture would be cleanses, detox, like I said, clean eating. Maybe 10 years ago, it was more about elimination diets, where now everything is about gut health. Everything is about eating anti-inflammatory. And again, as you all can see, I am a registered dietitian. I love nutrition. I love what food can do for our body. I'm in the beginning of getting my doctorate in integrative health. So, there is something about gut health. There is something about anti-inflammatory. However, wellness culture, you will know when you spot it because it's very fear mongering. And so sometimes when kids pick up on this, they can feel better about themselves for eating a certain type of food and worse about themselves for eating another type of food. And then same thing about their body. So as we move forward, we're going to keep in mind we swim in this wellness and diet culture water. All right. So how I set this up is that I want you to know what is typical for kids and teens so that you can spot what is not typical for kids and teens. Okay. So here's how this is set up. We are all born at birth with a genetic blueprint that says already set in stone, this is how tall you're going to be when you're fully grown. And this is what your shoe size is going to be. And this is what your weight range is most likely to be as you get older. And typically it's a weight range. Every single human, if you look at this growth chart, is supposed to plot all over the chart. That is why we have these charts. So when parents come in to see me and they say, my child is growing at this percentile, something might be wrong. We always look at, what do your genetics say? What do the parents look like, if we can know that information? Could this be a normal form of growth? So the main things to remember are, always compare your child to your child. We're making sure that kids are growing along their curve. That's how we know if they are quote unquote at a healthy weight. I was going to save this for later, but this is a fine time to talk about it. My daughter that's in middle school came home at the beginning of the school year. She's in a home economics class. And she said, my teacher, Mom, you're never going to believe this. My teacher brought in a scale and had all of us get on the scale in class and then calculate our BMI and then calculate something about calories and something about how many calories we needed to do to burn off doing this amount of exercise. And she said, but Mom, you know what? I knew that my teacher didn't have our growth charts and we're kids. And so she really didn't know if we were actually healthy. And I thought, okay, good. We've been having these good conversations. And I'll go more into that and how sometimes health class can actually be a catalyst for an eating disorder. But again, I think it's important for adults to know that every child is going to grow on their own growth curve. So if we have a child that is growing at the 90th percentile for weight for age, that is where they are supposed to be, especially if they've always been there. They're going to be gaining more weight every year than maybe somebody at the third percentile, but they are still supposed to be gaining and growing. And the way that we can know if a child is at a quote unquote healthy weight is that they are following their curve. Same thing, if a child's growing at the third percentile and they've always been there, we don't call them underweight. We just call them they're growing at the third percentile and they're still supposed to be gaining and growing every single year. It's just going to be a little bit less every year. So when we want to actually red flag something is when somebody's always been growing at the 90th, but maybe they drop to the 50th. And the sad part about this, and again, this is, we all live in diet culture and so do doctors, but sometimes I will have kiddos come in where their doctor praised them for that weight loss. They praised them for getting from the 90th to the 50th, where that they actually had major eating disorder issues, and instead of flagging that as something to be concerned about or something to at least check in with a child or their family about eating habits, if anything has changed, maybe they started a sport, because sometimes maybe there's nothing going on, but anytime somebody either goes up 15 percentiles or more or down 15 percentiles or more, that's when pediatricians should ask questions about it. But what ends up happening is sometimes we have larger kids and pediatricians tell them they are quote unquote overweight. And what that would mean is that we're comparing all kids to the 50th percentile. If we're saying kids above that are over, and if they're under 50th, they're lower. And as we know as adults, not everyone is supposed to have the same size body. That's what we call like body diversity. And that's very real. So I think when parents know this, when educators know this, when teachers, counselors know this information about growing kids, they're more able to normalize it when we're around kids. So, for example, with my kids, they're just going through these phases where there is a 45 to 65 pound on average weight gain between 11 and 14. And again, this happens at all different rates at all different times. Some kids just kind of grow out and up, some grow out and they stay out, and some just kind of get taller, but they still gain weight every year. But I think it's really helpful when we know that this is normal, so we can tell the kids, hey, you're supposed to be buying new clothes every year. Every summer we go back to school shopping. And you know what? Right now with my daughter that's 13, it might be every 3 to 6 months that we're buying new clothes because, rapidly her body is changing. And if you think about it, somehow all of us go from a child's body to an adult body and somehow they get there, right? And it just might look different for every person. So especially during middle school and high school, I actually did end up, of course, reaching out to my daughter's home ec teacher, and she was super kind. And hey, I had just asked, like, what were you expecting? What was the purpose of that? What were you hoping would be the outcome of all the kids getting on the scale? Where we know that kids' bodies are supposed to be changing drastically during these years. And actually her response was, I've never really liked that. It was just part of a curriculum I was using. And now that you have said this, I'm going to take it off. And I don't think we need to use it to learn about health, which is very true. So we know that visible body fat comes out between 11 and 14. We know that kids' bodies are changing all the way through college. So sometimes people will say, oh, the freshman 15, I'm using quotes, but you can't see me, the freshman 15, when in reality, your body at 18 or 17 should not look the same at 25. That's different. But yet we're all told that once you're in high school, your body should always be the same for the rest of your life. And that is diet culture. That is diet culture. It's not supposed to be the same. In 2016, the American Academy of Pediatrics had this guideline that said pediatricians should not talk to kids about their BMI or talk about their weight because they knew that it was very harmful. Now, Since then, in 2023, we have new guidelines for pediatricians, and they actually went, in my opinion, backwards because now not only are they supposed to talk about BMI and weight, now they're supposed to recommend Ozempic and different types of weight loss injections for any child that is in a high BMI range. And I actually didn't add that to this because I always want to, remind people that in 2016 that one was actually more appropriate. And parents can also, at the pediatrician's office, ask, separately, if you have any concerns, please address me separately, not my child. Because what studies show is that when children are told by a trusted adult that something is wrong with their body, they do not end up treating their body better. They don't end up taking care of themselves. They don't end up eating, more nutritious foods and exercising. They actually end up feeling much worse about their body, usually developing disordered eating behaviors, taking diet pills, taking laxatives, either over exercising or never exercising or binge eating. So it doesn't, talking about kids' bodies by a trusted professional is really never helpful. And if you are a parent and you're listening to this, always trust your gut. Another example, and that will pertain to this message, is that sometimes kids don't grow. And when I talk to the parents, by grow, I mean they don't gain weight. When I talk to the parents, it turns out that maybe the parents are doing the Whole30 diet, after New Year's, whatever dieting they're doing, and they've taken out maybe all of the snack foods out of their home that their kids were like needing to eat to survive. And now that the children can't get enough of their preferred foods, they're actually not growing appropriately. So these are just all things that I think as educators, as mental health professionals, that are really important to know about what is like normal growth patterns. So here is what normal, typical nutritional needs are for growing kids. And by the way, this also pertains to us. It pertains to all humans. If I were to talk about this just in a nutshell, if someone were to ask me, what's healthy eating from a dietitian's perspective, it is consistent, adequate feeding and eating. And so I want you all to think about the either your house or the school that you're working in. Do we give time at home and at our school for children to get their basic nutritional needs met? Is there time for breakfast, or do they have zero period? Is there time for a morning nutrition break? Is there time at lunch to actually sit down and feed and nourish their body appropriately? Is there time to go to a school club meeting or to do tutoring and to go wait in the school lunch line if they're buying lunch? Is there time after school before their sport to actually nourish their bodies? Do they go home? Do they have dinner? This goes in along the same lines as, are they able to get adequate sleep with the schedule that we have? So the human basic needs are food, water, shelter, sleep. And this is where this consistent, adequate feeding and eating comes in. Because we live in diet culture, oftentimes parents, educators, adults, we're thinking more about, oh gosh, are kids eating too much? And what we really need to switch that to is, are they getting enough? Always asking the kids around you, did you get enough to eat for breakfast? Did you get enough to eat for your snack, your lunch, your dinner? Are you given time to get these foods in? It's also okay to do, especially in the high school years, a little education on carbohydrates. Carbohydrates increase your mood. They boost your serotonin. They make you calm. They give you energy. They're the brain's primary source of fuel. And guess what happens when anyone doesn't eat enough carbohydrates? They're very irritable. They're cranky. They might be anxious. So carbohydrates are extremely important. It's one of the 3 main macronutrients that humans need to live. But if you think about our current diet culture, which, by the way, diet culture, you can tell that it's diet culture because it goes in fads, just like fashion. So it changes all the time. When I was growing up, it was fat-free. So no one ate fat. Everybody demonized fat. Everyone was scared of fat. Now it's carbohydrates. And so every day I see these sweet adolescents that are very, very scared to eat carbohydrates. And they're also very depressed, very anxious, not doing well in their sport, not sleeping well. And so it's important that kids know carbohydrates are important. Protein is important. protein right now is that angel wing food where it's going to fly, get their angel wings and fly to heaven. So protein right now is glorified in diet culture. So sometimes parents can feel bad if they have kids that mostly like carbohydrates, which, by the way, carbohydrates and fats, those are the grow foods. Those are the foods that kids need so much of when they're going through puberty and after. Yet we worry as adults, like, oh my gosh, are they not getting in enough protein and vegetables? And sometimes parents will feel good about themselves if their kids eat vegetables and really bad about themselves if their kids don't eat vegetables. But again, as educated adults, because when you have this information, you're more armed with, being able to support kids having these healthy relationships with food. We know that carbohydrate, protein, and dietary fat, those are all equally important in the human diet. Dietary fats, those are going to, be like adding butter to your toast. That's going to taste a heck of a lot better than just dry toast. If you like butter, that is. But usually adding fats to things is going to enhance the flavor. And then dietary fat helps with every single hormonal reaction in your body. And it also helps with like for females, when they eat enough dietary fat, they have enough estrogen. And when they have enough estrogen, they can menstruate. And when they have enough estrogen to menstruate, they can also form bone. And we form bone until we're 20. And so that is very, very, very important. And same, testosterone can also go down if there's not enough dietary fats. We need water. And then lastly, we need joy. And joy is very important in the eating and feeding process. And I think because we live in diet culture, sometimes the joy is taken away from everyone's food. As humans, we are supposed to like food. We're supposed to seek it out because it legitimately keeps us alive. And so I love it when I meet with kids and they tell me about their last experience where they said, oh, Katie, well, I used to just not really think about it. I used to just, eat my bagel for breakfast and I would come home and have a sandwich for lunch. And my mom would pack me, some cut up fruit and a cookie. And, I would have dessert. And, but oh, now I don't do that. Now I, think really heavily about what I'm putting in my body. And it's really not normal for kids and teens to hyper focus on health. Typically, we'll go more into this in a later slide, but that's a little bit more indicative of the potential of an eating disorder developing when kids become hyper focused on health. Typically, if someone tells a kid, these are healthy foods and these are unhealthy foods, typically it kind of just like goes in one ear and out the other. What we don't want to happen, but what we see happen is that they either become fearful of eating the foods that teachers, health professionals tell them is bad. So they end up being fearful and they never eat it because they think something bad will happen. These are typically kids that have more like anxiety, OCD tendencies, perfectionism. Or you have the kids that start hiding the food that you have told them is not good for them to eat. And so they eat it in secret. And you might find wrappers in their room, or you might find it in their backpack, and they feel like they can't eat their preferred enjoyable foods in front of an adult because of the judgment that they might receive because of how we talk about food. So I'm going to skip through this part, but I'm happy to come back to it if anybody has a more of a question. But this one isn't as much for counselors. It's more for parents feeding kids. But when I do this slideshow for parents, we talk about what a healthy parent-child feeding dynamic looks like at home and how that can really be the catalyst for a healthy body image if we instill body trust in our kids. If we make the assumption that kids know how much they need to eat to grow. And that's also something that I didn't talk about on the growth chart, but kids don't have to do anything to make their body grow. Their body does that all on its own. They can just kind of kick back and listen to their hunger and fullness and, eat their yummy food. So I'm happy to come back to this, but we're going to more move on to how we, as either parents or counselors, nurses, coaches, teachers, how we can set up the space that we are in to prevent eating disorders and to enhance that relationship that's positive to food and body image. Because really what we're looking for is for kids to grow into adults that are competent eating adults. And a competent eating adult is someone that trusts their body. They know what hunger and fullness feels like. They know how to eat to satisfaction. They know how to say yes to foods that they really like, and they feel comfortable saying no to foods that they don't like. Competent eaters, they like to eat and they feel good about liking to eat, which seems just so rare in our culture. But that is actually a lovely, beautiful thing. And so next we're going to talk about kind of the do's and don'ts. And this is where I want you to have some grace with yourself. But we are role models for these kids. And trust me, when I work with teens and we're trying to set up a plan in their school, when they're recovering for an eating disorder, I'll just tell this one story because it pertains here. I had a teen, I live in Tustin, so I think it was Beckman High School. And she had a note from her doctor that she was not safe to participate in PE. And so instead of doing PE, because she needed to rest and her heart rate needed to come up, she was going to do an online PE health class that her teacher gave her instead. And can you believe it? The very first thing in this health class that she had to fill out, because she's, in recovery from her eating disorder, was count how many calories you're eating in a day. Please categorize these foods as good and bad, healthy and unhealthy. We all kind of joked together, like, this is not a joke. And so I called and talked to the PE teacher, and it was horrible. She said, I know why you're calling. People have called before. I've tried to get them to change the curriculum. My daughter had an eating disorder. I can't believe that I have to recommend this, but apparently it's really difficult to change curriculum from the top down. So this is something that you all can think about in your schools. Talk to whoever it is that teaches the health class. If we're teaching kids to count calories and write down all their food, you potentially could be starting the catalyst for somebody's new eating disorder. Oh, wow, you can barely see the top one, but I can. Okay, so here's how we're going to create these environments for kids, whether it's in the counseling office, in the school lunchroom. Think about any type of poster that you have at your school. I know this is in doctor's offices a lot, but really think about, are we promoting health or are we promoting diet culture? So I talk about this in terms of household, but like I said, it's whatever space you are in. So being a body inclusive household or conference room or therapy room means that we are accepting of all bodies. So every single human being that walks into this space is respected and treated with dignity, no matter what the body looks like. And so definitely, as you can tell, this is something that parents can foster with their kids from a young age. As Heather and Joy know, I just got back from a trip to a resort in Mexico, and you get to see so many different types of bodies. And one of my daughters is just so sweet, and she's still at that very pragmatic stage where she is just noticing bodies for the first time. Like toddlers, they point out bodies. They don't mean any harm by it, but they just point it out. And so we had a nice, good conversation about how, yes, some people have more squishy bellies and some people have, smaller and bigger butts. And like, that is the way the world is supposed to be. So let's not put any type of judgment on that. It just is the way it is. Okay, so we treat all bodies with dignity and respect. For parents, feeding their kids that are in different body shapes exactly the same. So whether you have a child that is in a large body or a small body or anything in between, you offer breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks in intervals throughout the day that include carbohydrates, proteins, fats, add in some fruits and vegetables. When kids are eating, they naturally know how much to take of each food, which is the one that I didn't go over, but we can talk about later if you want. Really pay attention to how you yourself talk about your body and other people's bodies. I would say that in the teacher's lounge and in the nursing, I don't know what they call it, the nursing break room, when I've worked with people over the years, those are two of the most diet culture-y places that you can be in. A lot of times people are on diets. A lot of times they're talking about their latest diet. kids are listening to you, and we shouldn't just be changing the way we talk. If somebody around us is struggling with an eating disorder, we should go all the way backward and just, this is the way we should talk. Is that it is not beneficial for kids to hear about adults around them talking about their diet or their bodies in any way, shape, or form. um, I tell my kids, there's no hierarchy of bodies. um, we don't make any weight, shape, or size comments. So really, if we think it's a compliment, but we're going to glorify weight loss, that is very harmful for any child, because whether they have disordered eating or not, now they have it in their head that the adults around me who I trust, they think that body shape and size is important. And oh, maybe I should think that that's important. And before, maybe they didn't. Um, Definitely teaching media literacy, and especially for teens. A lot of times, teens can start recognizing injustice. And so that's a really good way to kind of get them on board. I know my older daughter's annoyed at me about pausing all the 80s movies that she's wanting to watch now and telling her, like, that's fat phobia, that's diet culture. Do you notice, like, all these movies have some form of body oppression in them? But teens really like that, and we can talk to them about not participating in it, really allowing them to opt out of that type of talking. um, so we talk about dieting, tracking, weighing, counting, skipping meals. These are where the adults, we can role model eating a variety of different types of foods without saying anything about it. We don't have to say, I'm bad for eating this, or, oh, I didn't eat all day, that's why it's okay that now I'm eating a lot. And you'll notice this when you leave this presentation today, how much people seem to think they have to justify why they're eating. Because we're human, we all need food. No one needs to justify it. It's just like using the restroom. For parents, I will often tell them to remove the bathroom scale. That it's just not very helpful, especially when you're raising teens. And I know probably in schools, this message is out there about how 90% of influencers are promoting misinformation. And that goes along with the what I eat in a day. And I can't tell you how many of the influencers that I actually see in my office who have eating disorders, who still post pictures of themselves in bathing suits and whatnot, and what I eat in the day. And it's extremely disordered. So I think our kids need to know that. So the last section here is really making sure that we do not label foods as good, bad. I mean, even if you don't like something and so you think, oh, that's gross, that's still rude. And so we don't label foods as good or bad unless it's moldy, and then it's bad, don't eat it. Or unless, you dropped it on the ground and it's past the 5-second rule, then maybe that's bad. But really what we want to do is just call food by its name. These are chips. These are goldfish. This is a salad. This is an egg. This is, cereal. We do not have to put a judgment label on it, because that putting the judgment on it ruins kids' ability to actually listen to what their body needs in terms of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and getting in the right amount of food for them. When we label foods, they are no longer able to actually listen to their bodies like they were born with that ability at birth. So we make it more difficult for them. We think we're helping, but in reality, we are actually potentially messing with their relationship to food and body. I just talked about that. So it's harder for kids to intuitively eat when there's morality placed on food. We talked about role modeling, and we talked about really us role modeling for kids eating normal meals, respecting everybody's bodies. And maybe the greatest thing we could do is talk positively about what our bodies can do, not what they look like. But Yeah, so that's the big one here. So what happens when teens start experimenting with using exercise, body shape, and food choices to express their identity? So I'm so sorry this is white, you can barely see it, but teens are a very vulnerable group to developing disordered eating, and here is why. We had talked about that big brain development that happens where I think it's under 14, kids are very black and white in their thinking. So this is a bad food, and so I'm bad for eating it, or I should feel bad about liking it. This is a good food, so therefore I should feel good about myself and proud of myself for eating it, and other people are going to judge me as good about myself for eating it. When teens are trying to figure out their identity, when they're trying to figure out, like, who am I? What are my morals? What are my values? And they end up, because we live in diet culture, grabbing on to, oh, I'm an exerciser. I am a sports person. I am a clean eater. I am paleo. I'm intermittent fasting. I'm keto. When they start identifying with a way of eating or a way of exercising or a way that their body looks, it is not a good foundation for building self-esteem and self-worth, because as we know as adults, what my food likes and dislikes are, those change all the time. And our taste buds are always changing. So if I were to say I'm vegetarian and then one day I woke up and I wanted to eat meat, that might be hard for me because I told everybody around me I was vegetarian and now I want to eat meat. Maybe it would be difficult to do that. And by the way, becoming vegetarian can sometimes be the beginning phases of developing an eating disorder, just like if a kid says, I want to start eating healthy. Again, not saying it is, just saying question that. That's interesting. Tell me more. This does not apply to a family that has always raised their kids with no meat. That's very different. This is more, I used to love meat and now I heard meat's bad. And so I'm not going to eat it anymore, but I like it. There are so many body changes that happen to these teens, man. And sometimes they have a lot, not sometimes, they often have misinformation about metabolism and normal growth. So that's where, as educators and counselors, we can come in and say, hey, your body's supposed to be changing and growing. Like, what else can you hold on to for your self esteem and your self worth that doesn't have to do with the sport you play or the type of food you eat or how your body looks, because we know that those things change, and especially bodies. Our bodies at 13 are not supposed to be the same at 18, are not supposed to be the same at 25, and certainly not 30, 40, 50, 60. So if we're looking for real self-esteem and self-worth for these teens, it is not going to be based on food or body. But sadly, because we live in this culture that moralizes and really puts identities on how we eat and what we look like, it is so easy for teens to start developing eating disorders during those ages. And I'm seeing it younger and younger, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. It used to be that around 12 and a half, 13 was kind of the prime age when those body changes are big time that eating disorders would develop. So that's what happens with teens. How can you tell if somebody has an eating disorder? You cannot. There is this huge misconception that you can look at somebody and know if they have an eating disorder. You cannot tell anything about how someone eats or how they exercise by looking at them. But what we can tell by looking at people is our own bias. So you can, in your head, start working on this when you leave this presentation. Only 6% of people that have a diagnosed eating disorder are quote unquote underweight based on a BMI chart. 6%. So you can see anybody in a lineup and we cannot make assumptions. And certainly we don't want to, if somebody comes to you and says, I think I have an eating disorder, and you look at them and you make an assessment based on what their body looks like, that is harmful. And they may not get the treatment that they need, because eating disorders are a mental health issue. They are not a body looks or a food issue. Does that make sense? They can only recover if they eat consistently and adequately enough food, enough macronutrients. But it's a mental health disorder. Another misconception about eating disorders that I hear from parents all the time is, but he was still eating. He was still eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. People with eating disorders do eat. They just are not eating enough to sustain a healthy body or life or mental state. It's amazing to me, and this is almost over, but my last couple little slides are, for good mental health, it is very important that you check in with teens. Are you eating a breakfast? Is it a starch, a protein, a fat? Are you eating a lunch? Is it enough starch and protein, fat? Are you eating dinner? Are you eating your snacks? If you're an athlete, it is very common to not be hungry, especially if you're having multiple practices a day. I used to work with the UC Irvine basketball team when they did a basketball camp, and they were doing, I think, 6 hours of heavy running every day. And these guys had to eat, upwards of 4,000 calories a day, but they weren't hungry because when we work out a lot, our body is so it's working on replenishing all of its muscle and going to all the extremities that we actually feel less hungry. But that's when teens need that education from us, that they actually need to be eating when they're not hungry to make up for what they are burning in their sport. Does that make sense? And so that's an interesting phenomenon that some people, they notice, but they didn't realize it was an actual thing to have your appetite kind of go down. Eating disorders also are not always about food. And what that means is you can have braces put on, and if it's really painful and it's hard to eat for a continual amount of time, anytime a growing child is put in a calorie deficit for more than 3 days, whether it's the flu, braces, mono, mouth, oral surgery, they have the potential to not be able to go back to eating enough food. And that is also how eating disorders can develop. They don't have to be about some sort of trauma, although they can be as well. So here is the really sad part, is that because we live in diet culture and toxic wellness culture, we're swimming in it. Eating disorder behaviors that people can die from are praised in this culture. So if someone cuts out sugar, again, there's a different purpose for everything, right? Which we could delve into, but cutting out sugar happens in eating disorders, but it's also praised in our culture. Cutting out carbs, taking the bun off your burger. Yay, nice work, nice discipline. That is praised. So it's becoming harder and harder for kids to seek treatment, and for parents and for people at schools and doctors' offices to recognize it, because we think it's good and we think it's healthy. Tracking calories, wearing their Fitbit, adding up all their steps. Some people can wear a Fitbit and no big deal. And then there's other people, especially teens, that based on their personality, that may not be good for them to have a bunch of numbers to add up every day. They can become obsessive. And then weight loss, we already talked about that I hope if anyone takes anything from this when they leave, don't talk about people's bodies and don't compliment weight loss or weight change at all. Eating quote unquote clean, intermittent fasting. This is such the fad right now. And it's an excuse sometimes where kids say, oh, well, intermittent fasting is healthy. And so, Katie, I don't need to eat breakfast, right? But yet maybe a year ago, they used to love to eat breakfast. Reading nutrition labels. There is a way that health professionals can teach kids how to read a nutrition label without putting it into good and bad. So if my kid says, I'm having trouble pooping, I might say, hey, when you get a carbohydrate, look and see how much fiber is in it. And if it has more fiber, it might help you poop. In no way do I need to say, now that's a good food. That's a healthy food. I just say, yeah, that food has fiber. And here's a bunch of other foods that also have fiber. And these ones don't. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they may not help you poop. Does that make sense? So for nutrition education, this is the last slide here. And then I'm happy to answer questions. The places that you would typically think would be the safest for kids and teens to be identified with eating disorders are often part of the problem. This little yellow square here, calories, tiny creatures that live in your closet and sew your clothes a little bit tighter. Diet culture. If any of the teens that are struggling with eating disorders heard this, they would say, see, I don't want to gain weight now. Everybody else views it like this. I don't want to do it. What do you mean? What do you mean, Miss Katie? So we talked about a lot of these already, but I'll just kind of restate these, that often catalysts for eating disorders are prompted by a comment from the pediatrician at the doctor's office. Whether you are a parent and you are told your kid is too big, that stresses you out to try to take away food from them. And then they usually end up just hiding it and eating it in secret, or they develop an eating disorder or an unhealthy relationship with food and body for the rest of their life. Same thing if a parent is told your child is too small. Then they start pushing food on the kid and they start trying to overfeed, and then that kid doesn't trust themselves. in school health class. Really take a peek at your school and look at the content. I can't tell you how many classes where kids watch a documentary about veganism, about killing animals. Again, we think kids can handle this and that they can see the bias in it like we can as adults, but oftentimes they can't do that. So calorie counting projects. Again, the big one right now is I just wanted to eat healthy, and then it accidentally turned into an eating disorder very quickly. Glow ups, if you don't know what that is, those were happening during COVID where kids thought, oh, I'm not going to see anyone for a long time, so I'm going to do all these HIIT workouts and I'm going to eat quote unquote clean, and then I'm going to change what I look like and I'm going to gain confidence and self-esteem. And then like we talked about, taking wisdom teeth out, having the flu. Sometimes kids can develop an eating disorder called ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, if they choke and then they get scared of eating after choking, or if they throw up and they have fear of vomit and then they're scared to eat afterward. Sickness, constipation, anything that takes away calories from a child for an extended period of time can ignite an eating disorder. All right. It is never too late to make small changes that will impact for you guys, either your kids at home or your students that you work with. I hope I covered everything. I know I talk really fast. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. My office is in Tustin. And here's some resources. Anyone have any questions or comments or concerns? Joy, is there anything else I know we talked about some other things to address. Did you want me to add anything else like we talked about?
I would love, does anybody have questions? I don't want to jump in. I know that was amazing information. So helpful. Thank you very much. Like you said, we are all working with students every day. And it's just such important content. So thank you. If you have a moment, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of ways in which we as school staff can better collaborate with the treatment team of a student. Many people on this call have probably been the first one that a student came to about an eating disorder, or healthy eating that they know is not enough, right? Or things like that, right? However the kid phrases it, as we identify eating disorders, I'd love to hear a little bit about ways in which we can collaborate, get the student connected, and then collaborate with the team. And then another thing that comes up a lot is students who have eating nutritional plans from a dietitian, and ways we can support that at school, given some limited capacity, but kind of what would a dietitian be looking for in supporting a student who's maybe returning to school after treatment?
Okay. So the first thing to do if a student comes to you that you think is either developing an eating disorder or already has one, is you have to involve the parents. This is to be treated like, if somebody comes in and says that they want to harm themselves or others, that is truly what an eating disorder is. And so it needs to be treated as such. Eating disorders thrive in secrecy. And so oftentimes the student would probably say, please don't tell anyone, please don't tell my parents. But also eating disorders are life-threatening. And so the first thing I would recommend is having a conversation with the parents, bringing them in, doing a Zoom, making a phone call, and setting them up with a treatment team that involves an eating disorder dietitian, an eating disorder therapist, and an eating disorder pediatrician. So eating disorders are a specialty, just like oncology would be a specialty. I am not an oncology dietitian. I am an eating disorder dietitian. So there are specialists out there, and it's very important that they seek a team of specialists. If you were to have a child discharge from an eating disorder center that has a plan to eat at school with a school counselor, the ideal way to handle that is to immediately get a release from them, a HIPAA form, so that you have authorization to speak to the whole team, including everyone I mentioned, plus the medical doctor. so that you know this is the person's eating plan and this is the expectation. And then as a school counselor, you also get to say, this is feasible or this is not feasible at our school. So when I talk to school counselors, they're so kind and they always email me and we talk about, they might tell me, Katie, I'm happy to have so and so sit with me during the lunch period, but I also need to be making phone calls and, whatever it is I'm charting. And so I can't always have 100% eyes on them. And my take on this is that health or school counselors, they're not necessarily the eating disorder treatment team. And so it's lovely if a child can come and eat with you and you're able to just be someone there and be able to give feedback whether they're able to eat or not. But I wouldn't ever want to impose on somebody that's not professionally trained on how to respond to a child that's supposed to be eating their lunch with you and tosses it in the trash and walks out. I would just say then you have the ability to talk to the treatment team and you give them that feedback. Does that help?